Great. Well, once again, thank you for joining us on today's webinar series, Getting Started with Prisma Access, where we will be reviewing onboarding service infrastructure and service connection. So a quick recap on what to expect in the next 60 minutes. We will be discussing key Prisma Access design considerations, configuring a Prisma Access service connection, performing your first commit to push to cloud, and also we will be ending this with a Q&A session. Please make sure that you enter all of your questions on the Q&A box, and we will make sure to address all of your questions at the end of today's session. Also wanted to give everybody a quick reminder of our upcoming webinars, which could include Prisma Access Insights, getting visibility and control of your Prisma Access solution, which will happen on Wednesday, March 10th at 2 p.m. Pacific time. We will also be doing Getting Started with Prisma Access Part 3, onboarding the Access service for mobile users, which will happen on Wednesday, March 17 at 8 a.m. Pacific time. So I wanted to take a quick minute here to introduce your customer success tour guides, which include the following: your Prisma Access customer success managers, which is myself, Wendy Sanchez, and Anil; your Prisma Access customer success engineer, which is Karan Shasad. And also wanted to let everybody know that all the steps described here are available online at Tech Docs and Live Community. We will also be placing the links to those on our chat box so that you guys can easily access those if you have not already. Great. So before getting started with this, let's see where we should be at for the onboarding journey. This is to make sure that you're in the right webinar series. So let's see what should be completed at this point. At this point, your Prisma Access activation should be completed. At this point, your prerequisites for onboarding should be completed, which can include the following: ports and APIs allow list to be updated, Prisma Access APIs allowed, TCP ports and FQDNs required for Cortex Data Lake. HA designed for Panorama should be in place. Your Cortex Data Link and Prisma Access licenses should be activated. Your Cloud Services plugin should be installed, and Cortex Data Lake logging should be set up. Also, your device groups and templates should be in place. Great. So I will be handing this over to my colleague, Karam, who will be taking it on from here.
Thank you, Wendy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Prisma Access Getting Started webinar series, part 2. My name is Karam Shahzad. I'm Customer Success Engineer for Prisma Access. Today, we'll be discussing about how to set up service infrastructure subnet and how to onboard a service connection. So before we jump into the setup or configuration section and let you know how you can onboard a service connection, let's have a look at the key Prisma Access concepts, which are really important in order to set up a service connection and service infrastructure. To enable a service infrastructure in the cloud for your remote network locations and mobile user, you must provide a subnet that Prisma Access uses to establish a network infrastructure between your remote network locations, mobile users, and service connections to your HQ or data center. The IP addresses in this subnets also enable Prisma Access to determine the service routes for the services such as LDAP, DNS, or SCEP, as well as enable other inter-services communication. Because a large number of IP addresses will be required to set up a service infrastructure, you must use a /24 subnet. And this subnet will be an extension to your existing network or the IP address pool you assigned for Prisma Access users. If you have a large number of mobile users, branch offices, or both, provide a large infrastructure subnet. Here are some of the important consideration before you configure your service infrastructure. If you create a new subnet for the service infrastructure subnet, use a subnet that does not overlap with other IP addresses you use internally. Use an RFC 1918 compliant subnet. While we are recommending to use RFC 1918 compliant subnet, make sure that you're not using internal internet public IPs which are having a conflict with or overlap with the RFC 1918. Designate at a slash 24 subnet at minimum because this service connection can be very large. So the minimum should be slash 24. There should be no overlaps and it should not overlap with the IP address range 100.64.0.0/15, which is reserved for Prisma Access internal use only. Also, the IP infrastructure subnet you will configure for the Prisma Access, it should not overlap with your mobile user IP pool, which you would define in your mobile user section. So we're talking about in IP service infrastructure subnet service connection. So what is a service connection for Prisma Access? A service connection is a private access which allows access to the resources in your HQ or data center. So for example, if your security policy requires the user's authentication using an on-prem authentication services such as your Active Directory, you need to enable Prisma Access to access the corporate locations where your service resides. And you have to set up a service connection, service account that the service can use to access. Similarly, if you have a corporate resources that your remote network and mobile user need to access, you must enable Prisma Access to access corresponding corporate networks. We're highly recommending to set up a service connections, even if you don't need access to your HQ or data center. Because with the Prisma Access, service connection will help you to communicate if your remote networks and mobile user, if you are having both the licenses, your remote network and the mobile users both, then in order to communicate your remote networks, the branches with mobile users, you should need a service connection and you should deploy it. Even you can put a placeholder for service connection also if you don't need access to your HQ or data center. So let's plan the service infrastructure and service connections. Look into the what you need for the planning of service infrastructure before you onboard a service connection. So if you use the service connection to access information from your HQ or data center, gather the information for each of your HQ or data center location or site you want to onboard with the Prisma Access. And make sure that that site or service is able to connect with IPsec capable firewall, router, or SD-WAN device. IPsec settings for terminating the primary VPN tunnel and as well as the secondary VPN if you want to set up HA active and passive. If you have existing template that contains IPsec tunnel, tunnel monitoring, and IPsec crypto profile configurations, you can add that template to the template stack to simplify the process of creating IPsec tunnel. Let's start configuring Prisma Access service infrastructure. So again, here are the key consideration again, which are the some do's and don'ts which you should consider and make sure that you're following the best practices. First step is log into your Panorama. Go to the Panorama tab. On the left, you will see the cloud service plugin. Click on that, go to the configuration section, and in the settings, you will see this dialog box will open where you will define your infrastructure subnet. As I mentioned earlier, /24 is a minimum requirement, but you can define a larger pool also depending on your need and how big your user base is. BGP-AS, enter the infrastructure BGP-AS you want to use within Prisma Access. If you want to use dynamic routing to enable Prisma Access to dynamically discover the routes to the resources on your remote network, specify. Otherwise, it will take the default AS number also. Template, as I talked about earlier in the previous slide. If you have existing one, you can add the templates here. Existing templates having the configuration of your IPsec tunnels, IP crypto profiles, you can add up here. And the device group. The next section is internal domain list. Use this step to configure the Prisma Access domain list if you need Prisma Access to be able to resolve your internal domains to access services such as LDAP servers on your corporate network via service connection. For example, if you want a DNS lookup for your corporate domains to go exclusively to the corporate DNS server, specify those corporate domains here. Then the next step is the Cortex data lake. Make sure that you're configuring the correct theater or the region where you want your logs to go. Also, configure a device group where you are using push to settings for the cloud for the log forwarding profile. Make sure that you have already set up log forwarding profile in Panorama. In the advanced tab, you will see there are two options, routing preferences and HIP distribution. Today, Prisma Access is supporting two types of routing preferences. One is default, another one is hot potato routing. Default is the Prisma Access using its default routing for its internal network. And in the hot potato routing, Prisma Access hands off the service connecting traffic to your organization's WAN. So before selecting this option, make sure that you understand your topology or network architecture completely before selecting this hot potato routing option. We will be having another webinar where we will be talk about hot potato routing in detail. So if you're interested, please do sign up and register for that in the webinar, which we talk about all the routing features and options for the Prisma Access. Enable the HIP redistribution to have Prisma Access user service connection to redistribute HIP information from mobile users and users at remote networks. So that's it. We are almost there. Now it's a time to perform the commit. You have done all the configurations which are necessary and needed for your service infrastructure. So before performing a commit, make sure that if there is a Palo Alto next-gen firewall or any firewall between the Panorama appliance and the internet, you must add a security policy rule on the firewall to allow the login service and the shared services app IDs. These applications allow SSL secured communication to the Prisma Access and Cortex data lake that the Panorama appliance uses to query logs. And also, port 443 and 444 outbound from Panorama is in your allowed list. Click in the commit to the Panorama, and then push to the devices, add your selection, and go to the Prisma Access tab, check the service setup, and perform the commit. It will take few minutes after you perform your commit. And after that, you will see that in Cloud Service Status tab, the Cortex Data Lake status will turn green. If it's not turning out green for some time, click on the details, and the detail will provide you some of the errors if there is any. And again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, make sure your security policy rules, if there's a firewall, security policy rules are set up to allow to communicate with the Cortex data lake. Ports are in the allow list. And if you still have any problem, please contact Palo Alto Networks support team. So we have successfully set up the Prisma Access infrastructure subnet at this point. Now let's look into the service connection onboarding, how to onboard a service connection. Here we have a quick video. Let's look into this first, and then we will jump onto the configuration section.
In this video, we'll go through the process of onboarding our first service network. The service network is an unmetered connection, usually to your data center, so that people on remote networks or mobile users can access resources down through this service connection. The service connection is not a security enforcement point. It would be at the remote network security processing node, or when the mobile user came in their gateway, that you could enforce security as to what went down this service connection. In order to configure this, I have already made some of the artifacts that we'll need. Under Templates and Network, looking at my service connection template, I have already created the service gateway, and I have already configured the IPsec tunnel where Prisma Access will be waiting for the data center to initiate his connection up to Prisma Access in order to create this VPN tunnel and create this connectivity. Next, I'll go back over to the Panorama tab and under Cloud Services and Configuration to start the process of onboarding my service connection. I'm going to click on Add here. This is going to bring up the onboarding screen. Now, the name that I give this connection is quite important. This is going to show up in lieu of zone name information in the log files that are stored in the Cortex data lake and that we can gain access to through Panorama. I'm going to call this connection name NYC Data Center, so that this will be what will show up in the zone information for my connection. For my location, I'm going to choose a location close to where this data center is, because this is where my corporate access node will be spun up to support this data center, where the compute will exist, where the ingress to the Prisma Access Cloud will exist for this. I'm going to choose US East. Next, for my IPsec tunnel, I'm going to choose the tunnel configuration that I've already set up and that we took a look at previously, my service network tunnel. Finally, I need to take care of routing. How will Prisma Access know what is down that pipe, what is in that data center, what resources can be accessed? I'm going to click on Add here. The corporate subnet that I'm going to use to support this is going to be the 172.16.17.0/24 network. Now I've told Prisma Access that there is going to be a VPN tunnel that he'll be waiting to have initiated to my new NYC data center, and that the resources that are down that tunnel is the 172.16.17.0/24 network. I could configure a secondary IPsec tunnel there as well. This would work in active and passive mode. At this time, I am not going to configure this. I will click on OK, and now we have onboarded our first service network. Remember, this has not yet been propagated to the Prisma Access Cloud. I would still have to come up here and click on Commit and Push to both commit these configuration changes to Panorama and then push this information up to the Prisma Access Cloud. This is the process to onboard a service network.
Okay, now let's move into each steps involved, for the service connection onboarding. These are all the steps listed here. Let's go into each steps in detail. Log into your Panorama, go to the Cloud Service Configuration section, add a new service connection, specify the name, and choose the location. It's recommended that you choose the location where you're as near possible to your data center or HQ. If you want to access resources or authentication services to your data center. If you have not done import the existing template for the IPsec tunnel configurations, you can go into the IPsec tunnel configuration section and do the IPsec tunnel configurations, which you will be using for your service connection. If you are setting up your IPsec tunnel primary and secondary, and active and passive, you should also configure the tunnel monitoring. If you use the tunnel monitoring with a paired device that uses multiple proxy IDs, specify the proxy ID or add a new proxy ID that allows access from infrastructure subnet to your HQ or data center. You can select any service connection that you have already added and active and backup. So one of the important point here you can see that backup service connection. Backup service connection option will be only available if you have selected hot potato routing when you are setting up your service infrastructure. If you have selected the default routing preference, which Prisma Access today is using internally for internal routing, then this option backup service connection will be grayed out. This backup service connection option will only be visible to you or configurable if you have selected the hot potato routing mode. Sorry. So if you have secondary WAN link, enable the secondary WAN and then select configure the IPsec tunnel. So if the primary WAN link goes down, Prisma Access detects the outage and establish a tunnel to your HQ data center over the secondary WAN. And if after some time the primary links came back, it will switch to the primary again. If you're using a static route, the tunnel failover time is less than 15 seconds from the time of detection. Or if you are configuring a BGP routing and have enabled the tunnel monitoring, the shortest default hold time to determine that a security parameter index or XPI is failing is the tunnel monitoring failure for 15 consecutive seconds. When the secondary tunnel is successfully installed, the secondary route takes precedence until the primary tunnel comes back. Today, Prisma Access supporting for service connection two types of routing, static routing and the BGP. So enable routing to subnetworks or individual IP addresses to your corporate site. Prisma Access uses this information to route requests to the appropriate sites for the service connections. The network at each site cannot overlap with each other or the IP address pools you define. On the BGP tab, select Enable BGP and then define your pair addresses, AS numbers if you are using a primary WAN and secondary WAN as one of the previous slide I described. So you can select also. As mentioned earlier, we will be having a detailed webinar where we'll talk about specifically on BGP and the routing preferences. So please do register for that webinar if you want to know more details about routing and BGP for Prisma Access. So set the pair addresses, active backup, quality of service. You can create a QS profile for QS profile to shape the QS traffic for remote networks as well as service connections and apply these profiles to the traffic that you marked with the PAN-OS security policies. Traffic that you marked with an on-prem device or both PAN-OS marked and non-on-premise device as well. So you have to create a QS profile, which you will attach here. And from the drop-down menu, you can select that QS profile. So we are almost there now. It's time to perform the commit. Go to the commit to the panorama, push devices, select the Prisma Access tab, and service setups, and perform your commit to onboard your service connection. You can add more service connection by following the same instructions which we have described. All the steps and procedures are same. If you have 3 service connections, 2 service connections, similarly, you can add more your service connections. So after performing a commit, it will take some time, after a few minutes, 5 minutes approximately, 5 to 10 minutes approximately time. Your corporate access node will be spin up in the Prisma Access Cloud. At this point, after performing the commit, you are halfway done for your configurations for the service connection. Now the next part is you have to configure IPsec tunnel on your on-prem device, your corporate data center HQ. Go to the Panorama tab, go to the Cloud Service Status Network Details. You will see here in the Service Connection section, a service IP address. This is the IP address, the pair IP address you will be using on your on-prem device to establish IPsec tunnel. You can take this IP from here and use this IP for your on-prem device, IPsec capable device for configuration. And make sure that for your on-prem device, you are configuring that IPsec tunnel configuration as an initiator, which will be initiating the connection to the Prisma Access. You can verify the connection status in Cloud Service Status tab. You will see that if there's any warning, it will be showing up in yellow status. Otherwise, if it's green. And if you will hover the mouse over this icon, you will see that it will give you some of those details related to the error. If all status is showing green, all is good. You can also see the deployment progress and status. You will see here, once you perform the commit, it will show you here, job started, progress, successful, failed, or timeout due to reasons and warning signs also. You can also monitor a graphical view of the service connection status, which geolocation your service connection is and what's the status. Go to the monitor tab, click on the service connection, and you will see this map at which geolocation your service connection is and what the status is. If you want to know the details, click on this one of the icon And you will see here the details will pop up underneath, which show the status. So, okay, BGP status, configurations are in sync, what's the ECMP status, all these details, allocated bandwidth, everything you can see here. That's it. We've successfully onboarded your first service connection, service infrastructure subnet, and now you're ready to onboard your remote network or mobile users or both. From here, I will be handing over to my colleague, friend, and customer success manager, Anil, who will talk about Prisma Access 2.0. Over to you, Anil.
Thank you very much, Kuram. Thanks, folks, for hanging in there. Home stretch here, about 15 minutes left. I'm going to cover Prisma Access 2.0 and that upgrade process. Very important topic. It's upon us right now, so it's timely for us to discuss it. Just a quick point on Kuram's content, really important content there. This is what we just went through is part 2 of a 4-part series. So the next 2 things that are coming at you, next couple of webinars that will come at you are 1 to complete your onboarding of mobile users, and finally to complete onboarding of remote networks for your branch office setup. But in between, we've got another webinar coming up next week or in the next couple of weeks on Insights, Prisma Access Insights. So we'll be talking more about that. Prisma Access 2.0 is upon us, and it brings a lot of great features, including the ability, long-awaited ability for our customers to manage their bandwidth across their remote networks at an aggregate level, at the compute region level. So that feature is a part of the new release, as is some improvements in performance at the branch office in terms of throughput that we support there, as well as a great feature that's also been in demand for pre-allocation of egress IPs. As you onboard new mobile user gateways, this becomes very useful to pre-allocate those egress IPs prior to making those mobile user gateways active. In addition, we continue to expand across the globe, and we've added a new compute location in Japan, a new wildfire region in the United Kingdom, and new CDL regions in Canada, Japan, Australia, and Singapore. And last but not least, a long-awaited feature has been the ability to use our panorama to schedule reports from within Prisma Access. So this is a great feature that's also coming at you in the 2.0 preferred release. So if we can go to the next slide, all this and much more detail on this release is on our live community in the 2.0 release preview document. And we will be scheduling another webinar, which will be a deep dive on all the features in Prisma Access 2.0. So please do take advantage of these resources and learn about what's coming in this great new release. If we can go to the next slide, I'll start talking about the upgrade process. The upgrade process has 3 main components. One is Prisma Access Insights. And you may have heard me speak about this before. Critical that you, all our customers, sign up for alerts through Prisma Access Insights. And that upgrade process, we'll give you a link to that in the chat, as well as after this webinar, we'll be sending out links to all the content that we've referred to here. Minimum software versions. Here's a change that we hope will help some of our customers. The minimum version of the Panorama device the PanOS on the Panorama device that manages your Prisma Access environment needs to be 9.1.4 or 10.0.3. For Global Protect, for mobile user deployments, the GP Global Protect agent that needs to be out there in your end users is a minimum of 5.0.6. So any version after 5.0.6 will be supported and will work. And then to take advantage of all the great features of Prisma Access 2.0, you do need the Global Protect agent version 5.2.5. Finally, another point that I'll be reminding you of later on is to continue the good practice and best practice of updating your allow lists, both your active and reserved public IPs based on what our API returns you. So we've got an API documentation, and if you can go to the next slide, Yeah, so this is the banner that you'll see in Insights when your turn comes up, when your tenant is up for an upgrade. And very important that you subscribe to those alerts so that you can see this banner. Click on that banner, and that'll take you to the next slide, which will, if we can go to the next slide. The next slide will give you the opportunities to choose which time slot in that window and which of your Prisma Access locations you want upgraded first. For most of our existing customers, the version of software that we'll be pushing out to you is the Cloud Services plugin version 2.0 preferred. And that's the one that I just reviewed some of the highlights on. But this screen shows you how you will be able to choose your window and choose your time slot. And then the next screen shows you the notifications you'll get along the way. Once you choose your time slot, we'll keep you updated along the way. 21 days in advance, we'll let you know via email and through Insights alerts that your upgrade window is coming up in 3 weeks. Then 3 days prior to that window, it will be again reminding you through Insights and through email that your upgrade window is coming up. And at the time of the upgrade window, obviously, we'll keep you apprised of the upgrade process by letting you know it's in progress and everything's either right, or if there's any issues, we will give you notifications about those issues all through Insights. So critical that you take advantage of that. If we can go to the next slide, all this is available to you on our live community, as I said. Very important to note that if you do not make any choices when afforded that opportunity in Insights, we will be forced to make a choice on your behalf and select a window within the timeframes for your tenant to get upgraded. Next slide, and we're in the home stretch here. Again, one more time of re-emphasis. Please do update your allow list as part of the upgrade process. No active, we want you to make sure that any active and reserved IP addresses that you have whitelisted and allow listed, those are retrieved from the APIs, and that documentation is available online. If you can go to the next slide. There's the documentation that on our technical documentation site that shows you how to retrieve the IP addresses for Prisma Access. This is a pretty straightforward process. Fundamentally, it's an API call that you call to retrieve the IP addresses, and then you would run a script on your side to update your allow list on your SaaS and other third-party applications. If along the way you have any problems, our world-class customer support team is standing by to support you and help you. Please do open a ticket as soon as you see an issue. They do respond quite quickly, and we are all hands on deck. So use that to take advantage and make sure to open a case if you need any help. And with that, I'll take it a final step. Make sure to subscribe to notifications from our status page as well. This is where we keep all our customers updated about all activities and the status of our platform at large. So any notifications about access, Prisma Access or related services will be posted here. And by subscribing to this page, you will get notified as soon as anything is updated on our side. That brings us to the end of our content for today. If we can go to the last slide, I do want to encourage you to please fill out the post-webinar survey. Let us know what your interests are, what your needs are. That is what allows us to build the content for these webinars and help you, our customers. That's what we exist for. So we are very happy to help you with that. Also want to bring your attention to a couple of upcoming things. First and foremost, up on the horizon, day after tomorrow, I guess, March 5th, is at 8 a.m. Pacific, bright and early, is our next in the office hours series. So please do sign up for that. We'll post a link to that in the chat session, but that link is also going to be contained in the post-webinar content and email that you'll get. So please do sign up for office hours and bring your questions to us. It helps us if you can let us know in advance what your questions are. Then we come prepared and we are making sure to answer those questions. Also, next week, our weekly series of webinars continues. And next up is Prisma Access Insights, Visibility, Monitoring, Alerts. So look forward to seeing you all at that webinar. And now we can open it up for any Q&A that we've got. Panelists, do we have any questions that we have? I see we have one question about, can a second infrastructure subnet be added?
Yeah, so no, we cannot add a second infrastructure, but yes, if needed, we can expand already configured one. For example, /24 to /16, we can do that, but we cannot add a second one. It will be only one.
My suggestion to you in that situation would certainly be, at that point of capacity planning and growth, do reach out. And if you need to, you can open a TAC ticket to say, hey, how do we go forward with trying to expand our infrastructure subnet capacity? They will route it to the customer success team or as needed, and you'll get the assistance as needed.
Yep.
Other questions, folks, please let us know your questions. We are happy to help you with anything that you need assistance with. We do hope these webinar series are of value to you. Again, we'll encourage you to please fill out the post-webinar series. Tell us specifically what areas you're interested in, and that'll help us guide and make sure that that content is available to you. Also encourage you to take advantage of all the resources we've got on our live community, as well as on our technical documentation site. With the launch of Prisma Access 2.0, we've got a plethora of resources that are being made available. So take advantage of those, folks. It's gonna all help you. Panelists, anything else further to add before we call it a day? Or
No, I think we're good. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, Sydney. Then I think with that, we will call it a day. We will